So now we'll move to the role of banks in the economy. We've already looked at this in the past a little bit, and we'll see primarily the role of the bank as an intermediary. So banks are financial intermediaries in the payment system. That helps us in our exchange for goods and services. They mediate this process. They're between the buyer and the seller. Banks help lower what are called transaction costs. These are costs associated with the transaction of buying something, which can be quite high. They also facilitate the transaction costs of borrowing money. Finding somebody to loan you money can take time. Well, banks are a central place to do that. So they lower the transaction cost of finding a lender if you want to borrow money. Banks serve as thus an intermediate between savers. Savers place their money in the bank. The bank then loans the money to people who want to borrow money. The borrowers then repay the loan with interest. That's the cost they pay. Banks then pay back the savers through the form of withdrawal. So savers want, I want my money back. And savers often get an interest. Well, the bank obviously makes money on this because the interest payments they receive here hopefully are higher than what they pay the savers. And this is a key source of revenue for a bank. The bank balance sheet. The bank balance sheet represents a listing of assets and liabilities, just like any other company out there. An asset is something of value that you own. So this is an important aspect. If you own something and you can use it to produce, and you can use it to produce something or to buy something, it's an asset. It has value. Cash, for example, is an asset. If you have cash, or a bank has cash, well, you can use it to pay for things. It's something you own. A liability is something you owe. It's something that you don't own. Somebody else has maybe loaned it to you or something, and you owe this money back. Many people borrow money to buy homes. In this case, a home is the asset. You have the home, but you owe the money to the bank in the form of a mortgage or a home loan. This is a liability for you. And the net worth of a bank is simply the difference between assets less what is owed. So sometimes we have more assets than liabilities. In this case, we have a positive net worth. So let's take a look. We have a simple T balance sheet. On the left, our assets. On the right, our liabilities and net worth. What are some of the typical assets a bank may have? The first are loans. Loans is our money. If a bank loans money to people, well, they're loaning their money, and other people owe it to you, or owe it to the bank, pardon me. So they owe that to the bank. It's the bank's assets. They've loaned it to people, but it's really their money, and you have to pay it back. Government securities. Sometimes a bank will go to the government and say, hey, I'd like to buy some security, a bond. This is government issued paper. And they give the money to the government. The government gives them a piece of paper that says, hey, this is an IOU. We'll give your money back at a certain time with interest. So the bank holds these pieces of paper, these bonds, government securities, and the government must pay them back their money when the bank comes back with the piece of paper. The piece of paper has value, and if the bank asks for its money back, the government has to give it back. And reserves. This is cash on hand, we say. It's readily available to give to people that need money. And this includes what's called minimum requirements. Banks must have a certain amount of cash on hand. This is called a required reserve. And the central bank fixes the amount. It's often represented as a percentage of demand deposits. So if we have a certain amount of checking accounts, we have to keep a percentage of that in cash. Now you can imagine if all the people with checking accounts said, hey, I want all of my money back, the banks don't have it. The banks are using your money to make loans, and they're investing your money in securities. They don't keep everything in the form of cash. That would just be bad management. Its liabilities, well, demand deposits. You go to a bank, you open an account, you create a demand deposit, meaning you deposit your money in the bank. The bank takes their money and holds it in the form of cash or invests it or loans it out. But the bank owes you that money. That's your money. It's a liability for the bank. And obviously, the difference between assets and liabilities, net worth. So let's take a look at a typical balance sheet, and you can see everything balances out. That's why it's called a balance sheet. We've got over here 10 million that's been deposited in demand deposits of our customers, our bank customers. We've taken that money. We've kept 2 million in cash. We've got 4 million here that's outstanding. We've got 5 million in loans, and our net worth is 1 million. We have 9 million in assets. We have 10 million that we owe, so we have a net worth of 1 million. We probably have this 2 million from other sources of cash that we had on hand and not in the form of demand deposits. So what we want to do now is take a look and see how banks create money. And this is a very interesting aspect of the financial system we have, and it's interesting to see how banks create money. So let's take a look at this and see how it's done. We'll go back to the balance sheet, and we'll go to my bank, and I put my name on the bank. I'm very proud of my bank here, Dan's Bank, and we're going to study how what happens if I have excess reserves. I've got reserves, I've got cash sitting around, and I've got more than enough money. So let's put my bank in this situation. I have assets, liabilities. I've got reserves of 10 million because somebody has come and given me 10 million euros in demand deposits. Now, I would not be a good manager of my bank if I kept all that cash sitting around not earning interest or not being loaned out and earning me interest as a banker. So I have to decide, how much do I keep? Well, the central bank, the European Central Bank, will determine amount of required reserves that I must keep in the form of cash in case these people over here want some money. And the required reserve ratio in this case is, let's say, 10% of total demand deposits. So the minimum reserve that I have to keep would be 1 million, pardon me. So I have excess reserves of 9 million. I don't need to keep that in the form of cash. I only need to keep 10%, which is 1 million, or 10% of 10 million. So what I'm going to do, what I'll do is I'll take that money and I'll loan it out, because that's how my bank can earn money. Also note that in this simple example, remember M1 included the amount of demand deposits. So M1 in this example is, for the moment, just 10 million. So what happens? Well, I get smart. I take the 10 million and I tell myself, I'm not going to keep that all in reserves. No way. That's just crazy. And I'm going to loan out 9 million of it, because I can make money that way. And I'll keep 1 million in reserves in case the people that demanded put their deposits over here come back and say, I want some cash. Now, what's going to happen? The money is loaned out to, let's say, some other person, Sam or Fred or whatever. And they've got suddenly 9 million in a loan. Well, you don't walk around with $9 million in your pocket. And so the person who has received this loan will probably go to another bank. And they're going to deposit that money in, let's say, Sam's bank. So I give the loan to Fred. Fred takes the $9 million that I gave him. Here's Fred. And Fred runs over to my competitor and deposits the $9 million in Sam's bank. Sam now has this in the form of cash as a reserve. And Sam is a smart man as well. And Sam will say, I have $9 million in reserves. That's earning nothing. I am going to loan out some of this money. Well, how much will he loan out? Well, he'll loan out 90% of it because the required reserve ratio is 10%. So he'll keep 10% in reserves, and the 90% he'll loan out as well, just exactly like I did. And so, well, 90% of $9 million, or $8.1 million, will suddenly be in the form of loans and be given to somebody else who will go to another bank and deposit the money, etc., etc. So, what's happened? Well, my excess reserves, which were 9, were loaned out. Suddenly, the second bank only has to keep $900,000 or 10% and can loan out $8.1 million. So with the excess reserves, I've expanded the money in one round by 9, but that's not the end of the story, because we see that the other bank is going to make another loan and demand deposits will increase again. The second bank, in this case Sam, loans out 8.1. The 8.1 is taken to another bank. They put 10% in reserves and loan out the rest. This second bank again will take 10%, put it in reserves, and loan out the rest. And this just keeps going and going and going. And so because the required reserves are not 100%, every time somebody puts money in your bank, you can loan it out, and then they put it in another bank, and they loan it out, etc. Where does it end? Well, it ends when we get to about 90 million. So we started with 9 million in excess reserves in my bank, which I loaned out to somebody. They deposited it, they deposited it, they deposited it. And the total change in M1, and this is a mathematical series, is going to be 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. So in this case, we're dividing by 10%. And so my initial increase in excess reserves resulted in a creation of 90 million euros. And this is called the money multiplier. Now there's limitations on this process, obviously. The state of the economy may imply that a bank may want to hold more reserves. Well, why would I do this? If the economy is in a recession, if we're in a situation of a recession, I have a serious concern because to operate my bank, I need to have people pay their loans. Otherwise, I have no incoming cash to give back to people, etc. If people are in a recession and lose their job, they can't pay their loan, and that puts my bank in a very delicate situation. So I may want to hold more reserves. Secondly, because people sometimes desire to hold cash. People like taking money, putting it in their house, under their mattress, inside books, because they don't trust the banking system. It's removed from circulation, and so we have a hard time calculating, well, if we expand reserves by a certain amount, well, what's going to happen to the final end? What's the impact of the money multiplier? Well, it won't work because there's a drain on the system. Money is escaping the system. The multiplier effect isn't as big as we think it would be. The loan market obviously is critical. limitations on the system is based on the trust that exists in the loan market. And if assets of banks decrease in value, well, they have less to loan. They can't loan out money to create money, more money. Pardon me. And obviously, limitations on all of this is based on the trust in banks and the risk of bank loans, bank runs, something we saw in Greece, where the Greek economy started to tank, and everybody ran to the bank, and this is why we call it a bank run. There's a run on the bank, and people ran to their banks and said, "I want my money," and the bank realized they don't have that much money because they're not required to have that much money, and they immediately closed the doors and locked the doors. Bear in mind that essentially banks are required to insure your deposits up to 100,000 euros. If you have more than 100,000 euros in a bank, it's not really insured by the bank.